各位观众朋友，大家好，我是韦依人。今天我们请到一名十分特别的嘉宾，也许您已经有听过他的大名，他是 Venture for America 的创办人兼 CEO， 以及2020美国总统大选民主党参选人 Andrew Yang 杨安泽。
Hey, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
How much of what I just said did you understand?
Most all of it, happily.
Only good things, so you don't have to worry. I have to say I'm really happy to finally meet you in person. Like we were talking about briefly before the interview, I've seen waves and waves of posts about you on my social media platform, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, mostly because I'm in the Asian American Canadian community, so I see a lot of you. And initially, I thought it was my friend who's doing pretty much like a trick to people.
Whose last name was Yang.
His last name is also Yang, who's saying that he's running for 2020. And then I realized it's not really a joke. It's actually for real. You are running for 2020.
Yes. I'm running for president. It was declared in the New York Times last year. And I'm happy to say now CNN, the Washington Post, and all the major American media companies are treating me as a fully declared top-tier candidate.
Right. I have to say you are very different in a lot of different ways. First of all, you're Asian. That's unheard of. We've never seen that before. And also, you want to give everyone $1,000 a month, which a lot of people think is a little crazy. And also, you have a lot to say about AI and how it's changing the workforce going forward. So I want to start with what our audience are probably most interested in, which is your background.
Sure.
How do you identify yourself, and were you born and raised here? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my parents immigrated to the U.S. from Taiwan. They met at UC Berkeley in the 60s, and then they had my brother and me. So I'm Taiwanese American, very proud Asian American. I was born in upstate New York in Schenectady. My father was working for GE, and then I grew up north of New York City. And I've lived my whole life here, and now I'm the father of two young boys who are growing up here. So I've been here the entire time, and really I've seen America transform over the last number of years. It's one reason why I'm running for president now.
But before November 2017, what were you doing? What was your career path? Was this something that you ever thought about? No,
I mean, I never thought I would be running for president at any point. I went to law school in New York at Columbia. And then after a very brief period as an attorney, I went into entrepreneurship. I co-founded a .com that did not work out. And then later I became the head of a national education company that was acquired by a public company. Before deciding to run for president, I was the head of an organization I started called Venture for America, which helped create thousands of jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Missouri, Alabama, and other cities around the country. And so during that time, I saw a lot of the country I'd never seen before, because I'd never been to a lot of these places. And I realized that the reason why Donald Trump won the election in 2016 is that we've automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, all of the swing states Donald Trump needed to win. And now my friends in Silicon Valley who work in technology know that we're going to do the exact same thing to millions of workers in retail, call centers, truck driving and transportation, food service, and on and on. So I decided to run for president because Americans are mistakenly blaming immigrants for the economic problems, that they can't get good jobs and make a good living. And it is not immigrants at all. It is the fact that technology is transforming the American economy.
I want to go back to your career path.
Sure.
You were a lawyer, which is what most Asian parents wish their children could become, either a lawyer or a doctor, right? So you were, you were the 150%. You were there. Why did you decide to leave that and explore something different?
You know, I just didn't enjoy being an attorney because I thought that it required you to think quite negatively. You always had to think about what could go wrong with like a contract or some transaction. And I thought to myself, well, I don't think I should always be trying to think about what could go wrong. I should try to build something. And there's a saying, I believe, in Taiwan that if you throw a rock on the street, you'll hit a CEO. Where there are, I think, a lot of entrepreneurs from our culture. And so I thought I should try and build a business as well in my 20s. And then being an entrepreneur, it turns out, was a much better fit for me. Even though it was very hard, it's much harder than, let's say, being good at school. But I found being an entrepreneur is a phenomenal career path. And that's one reason I started Venture for America, to try and provide that to more people.
And how did that being an entrepreneur inspire you to found Venture for America? Can you give us more details?
Well, sure. So the way I learned to be a CEO was I worked for a CEO who was very strong, and then I learned from that person. Okay. And so I thought, well, if we want to train hundreds, thousands of young Americans to become entrepreneurs, then we should have them work with entrepreneurs in places like Detroit or Cleveland or New Orleans that could use a boost. Mm-hmm. And so I'm happy to say that now dozens, hundreds of Venture for America alumni have already gone on to start their own businesses, which is what we need more of in America. But unfortunately, I grew to realize that technology was wiping out many, many more jobs than we're creating. And that's why I decided to run for president, to make the case to the American people that we need to restore a sense of opportunity to Americans by actually putting resources into their hands. Because right now the resources are leaving many of their Main Street communities.
So by saying resource, what's the plan that you're putting into this issue and solving this issue? We know that the universal basic income is one of your most appealing campaign point. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So right now in America, 57% of Americans can't pay an unexpected $500 bill, and 78% are living paycheck to paycheck. And you can see this with all of the stress around the shutdown, where if people miss a paycheck, then they...
You mean the current government shutdown can be one of the examples?
Yes, that when a government employee misses a paycheck, then their entire life becomes a disaster, and they start living in their car and all sorts of really... because Americans right now are on the threshold of financial problems all the time. Mm-hmm. And so what we need to do is we need to change that to get their heads up so that they can start to think more positively about the future and make better plans and better decisions. Mm-hmm. And so as you say, my plan to do that is the universal basic income, which would be a dividend that gives every American adult $1,000 a month. Now that sounds very dramatic or extreme, yes. But if you look at American history, Thomas Paine was for this at the founding of the country. Martin Luther King was for it decades later, and it passed the House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Richard Nixon. And in the 80s, one state, Alaska, declared a dividend for all of its citizens, and it's been in effect for 37 years now, where if you move to Alaska, everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. So it may seem dramatic, but the fact is it's already been in effect in one state for 37 years, and we just need to do what they did in Alaska for the rest of the country.
So Alaska is one example, and there are also other cities around the world that try to implement this. One of the examples is Manitoba in Canada.
Yes.
But that plan actually kind of fell through after a few years, saying that it's not very sustainable for the society. For a country that's like Canada, we know Canada, in a way, they put people first more than American. A lot of people would argue that. Also, a lot of...
Are you Canadian?
I actually am. So I'm a little biased in that way. And so for a country that's mentally more prepared for something that's leaning more towards socialism or more pro-benefit, it's not really working. So why do you think America would be ready for this mindset?
Well, the Canadian example is an interesting one because the data was tremendously positive, and the reason why Canada didn't continue it was not that it wasn't working, it actually was working, where you saw higher graduation rates, better health, better mental health, lower rates of domestic violence, lower rates of hospital visits. So it worked in Canada, and expressly when they made that change, they didn't even look at the data, and then when they looked at the data years later, they're like, wow, this was actually a home run. But this is not socialism at all. This is capitalism where income doesn't start at zero. And as a CEO and business person, I can tell you that businesses function much, much better and markets function better when people have money to spend and are not always on the edge of financial disaster. Socialism is when the government takes over companies. Putting money into people's hands is actually very good for capitalism and good for the economy. This would grow the economy by 6 to 8% and create more than 2 million jobs around the country. But not only would it be good for capitalism, it's necessary when you see what artificial intelligence is going to do to the most common American jobs. And one example I use is that driving a truck is the most common job in 29 states in the country, and we know that over time those jobs are going to disappear.
Right, and a lot of people are going to ask you, where's the money going to come from?
Yes. Well, the great thing about the American economy is that it has grown to $20 trillion, up $5 trillion in the last 12 years. We truly are the richest, most advanced economy in the history of the world. And with an economy of $20 trillion, you can actually fund this very straightforwardly, particularly because the money doesn't disappear, it goes right back into the economy. But the big move that America has to make is it has to join Canada and China and Europe and every other advanced economy and have a value-added tax. Because right now, the big winners from artificial intelligence and new technologies are going to be Amazon, Google, Facebook, the biggest trillion-dollar tech companies that don't pay a lot of income tax. And so that's the trap America's in right now, is that a lot of work is going to get sucked up by technology and the tax base is going to shrink. So what you have to do is you have to implement a value-added tax, which then gets the American public a tiny slice of every Google search, every Amazon transaction, every robot truck mile. And with a value-added tax at half the European level, you could pay for a dividend of $1,000 for every American adult.
So would you argue that the growth of American GDP or the growth in the past few years mostly come from these tech companies? Can we say that just by taxing them and having this value-added tax? What is it? Value-added tax? Yes, yeah. I got it right.
Yeah, Canada has one.
Do you really think that's going to fill the hole?
Yeah, I mean, it very much will. Where if you think about it for a second, what is the oil of the 21st century? The oil of the 21st century is artificial intelligence and robotics and self-driving cars and trucks. It's all this new technology. Automating truck driving, it would save $168 billion a year alone. It's actually enough money to pay all the truck drivers their full salaries and still save tens of billions of dollars. So the value is very much there. The problem is that the American tax system is not designed to actually capture that value, and that's what we need to change.
And you think these big tech companies are going to be on board with this pitch?
Well, I'm happy to say I already have dozens of Silicon Valley CEOs who are supporting me because they're not bad people. They know that they're automating away the jobs. They know that America is disintegrating and going into distress as a result. So if you say to them, hey, it's going to be better for your business and your markets over time if people have some money to spend, and yeah, you might make a tiny bit less money, but over the long term, it'll be in your self-interest. A lot of tech CEOs say, yeah, that's exactly right. Because it's not their intent to eliminate all these jobs. It's their intent just to make things work better, faster, more efficiently.
And we know that you also mentioned the current measure of GDP doesn't really reflect how people contribute to, say, family or the society. So say stay-home mom, their contribution for GDP was zero by the current measure. So how do you think we could change that going forward?
Yeah, so GDP, and you know what's interesting is China has actually looked at it and said, hey, GDP might not be the best measurement in the world. Maybe we should start thinking of something else. So GDP is something that America invented during the Great Depression. In the 1930s, they were like, we need a number to see how badly things are going. And even the inventor of GDP said it would be a terrible measurement of national well-being and we should not use it as that. In part because of what you just said, which is, you know, my wife is at home with our boys and her contribution to GDP gets measured at zero, which is obviously the furthest thing from the truth. So the way you change that is you make things like childhood success rates or education levels or mental health part of economic progress. And then if there's a parent who's spending time with a child, making that child stronger, that actually counts as economic growth.
And would that be reflected in monetary value? Do you think that would be a possibility in the future?
Yeah, very much so. Because if you think big picture about the way things are going, we have this monetary economy, but more and more forms of human labor are going to get outcompeted by software and artificial intelligence. And we're not talking just about truck drivers, we're talking about lawyers and accountants and insurance agents, because my friends are working on software that can do a lot of that work very, very quickly. And so we need to start trying to measure our economy differently and then drive work in those directions. Because if you just use capital efficiency as your measuring stick, more and more people are going to lose to technology every day.
So there could be different measures of your contribution, and you will get rewarded in one form or another.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I think that's going to take a while for this to actually take effect.
Well, the first big step is something like the freedom dividend, which is my version of universal basic income, which has the byproduct of paying, for example, stay-at-home moms to care for their children, or for people to take care of their aging parents. You know, so the freedom dividend is the first big step to take. But then it's pretty straightforward then to modify your measurements. You don't need an act of Congress to redefine unemployment or GDP. You just need to go to the agencies and say, hey guys, it's 2020. Are we really going to keep using a measurement we made up in 1930? So at this point, GDP is going to go up, and it's going to guide us off a cliff, because it's going to go up even as more and more Americans get left behind. And if you look at the measurements right now, American labor force participation is down to 63%, which is the same levels as El Salvador and the Dominican Republic. And life expectancy has declined here in the United States for the last 3 years because of a surge in suicides and drug overdoses. So that's actually how people are doing, and GDP measures none of that.
Right, so even though the numbers are telling us economically the nation is doing great, and our employment level is to an all-time low, you're saying that the country is actually not doing that great.
No, the country's not doing that great. And just ask yourself, if the country were doing great, would it have elected Donald Trump as president? I mean, there's a lot of suffering in this country and a lot of anger. And that's what we have to start addressing. We have to start addressing the problems that got Donald Trump elected. Because if we fail to do that, then Americans are going to keep on blaming immigrants and keep on blaming causes that have nothing to do with their economic problems.
So speaking of immigrants, we know you feel very passionate about AI is going to take away this flyover state truck drivers' jobs. A lot of our audience are immigrants, and they're not necessarily in these flyover states. They're not necessarily in the age group of 49 to 60. They're not white men without college education. So why do you think they should care about what you're pitching forward?
Well, the first thing is that if you're a citizen of this country or have children who are citizens, they're going to get $1,000 a month just like everyone else. So you don't need to be someone whose job is in imminent danger of being replaced to benefit from $1,000 a month. But the bigger picture is that America is going to become majority non-white in 2045, according to projections, which is only 26 years from now. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of anger among displaced workers, and that anger is going to end up landing right on immigrants and Chinese Americans and Asian Americans. Because right now, unfortunately, the Trump administration is casting China as the big rival or antagonist. And as anti-Chinese sentiment starts to harden, that's going to come smack down on Chinese Americans and Asian Americans, because most Americans don't really distinguish that much between Chinese Americans and Asian Americans. So if you're an immigrant and you're saying, hey, why do I care about this? If America continues to have these central economic problems, it's going to be very bad for Asian American immigrants over time.
And what's your strategy of including them into the society?
Well, one thing I would suggest would be great is having an Asian American man in the White House, or even on the Democratic primary debate stage in June. But we can demonstrate that we're just as American as anyone else. We care and love, we care for and love this country just like anyone else. Our children are Americans, and we need to step up and lead and contribute our own vision for this country as fast as we can. Because in the absence of us stepping up, then it's going to be someone else's vision. And over time, that other vision may or may not be inclusive of Asian Americans.
Right, so you're saying that because of your background, you'll be able to understand the community a little bit better than people from a different background.
Well, I mean, I'm of the community, you know, right. Like I'm the first generation born in this country. Like my wife and two sons are all Asian American. So, you know, like to me, the concerns of this community are my own, because that's just the entire set of experiences I've had.
And what do you think are some of the most challenging issues that immigrants are facing these days in this country?
Well, you know, if you think about what drew our family, or what drew my parents here, I mean, most people come here because they want to make a better life for themselves and their families. And it's one reason why politics generally has not been something that recent immigrants have gotten too involved with, because they think, hey, you know, I just want to try and make some money, make a good living. And so the challenges that immigrants are having, in my mind, are that you have this really bizarre, out-of-date immigration system here in the U.S. And so as president, one thing I'm going to do is that if you're an international student who gets a diploma at a U.S. university, I'm going to staple a green card to your diploma, because it makes absolutely no sense to educate someone here and then send them home to compete against you. And I have many, many friends who are in that situation where they've been educated in the States and they want to stay here, and then we somehow make it brutally difficult for them to stay. So that is very, very nonsensical, and we can fix that. But in terms of immigrants making better lives for themselves and their families, this economy has gotten more and more punishing, not just for people in middle America, but there are people that, for example, worked in the restaurant industry who a generation ago could have made a better lives for themselves and their kids, but now feel like they're stuck on a hamster wheel because the economics of these businesses are changing in negative ways. And so I think the challenges for recent immigrants are only growing.
Right, and with, the H-1B issue is definitely something that's really close to heart to a lot of our viewers because they're here for a better life, or better education, and yes. With the current administration, it's really hard.
Yeah, I also think the H-1B visa system needs to be overhauled. We need to grow the numbers tremendously because right now the lottery does not make any sense. But my point of view is that if an American company wants to hire someone, they should be able to hire that person, regardless of immigration status. Because there's this fiction right now that if I hire a non-American, I would have hired an American otherwise.
Right.
And most of the time, that's just not the case. Most of the time, you're trying to hire this specific person, and you just want to hire that person. And if you didn't hire that person, you wouldn't turn around and hire an American.
Right.
Like I have friends who run companies, and they just have to jump through all these ridiculous hoops for the H-1B visa, being like, no, I looked, and like there's a specific skill, and only this person has it. The whole thing is a waste of time. Like if a company wants to hire someone, they should be able to hire them. And in my opinion, that has no negative impact on an American worker.
Why would you say there's no negative impact? Because that's one of the, I guess, the biggest fear of Americans who vote for Trump, because they do feel they're being threatened with their job, their career by these outcomers or people who are immigrated to the country.
Yeah, and if you look at it, half of Silicon Valley CEOs are either immigrants or children of immigrants. Where when immigrants come here to this country, my father generated over 60 US patents for GE and IBM, which I dare say would be very positive for the American industry and economy. So it's not that immigrants are taking jobs, it's that technology is making it so that their human labor is less and less valuable. And so to me, if a company hires someone from abroad, that has no impact on the American worker because they weren't going to hire that American worker anyway. If anything, it might have a positive impact on the American worker because that company is going to be more competitive. And if it's more successful, then through the freedom dividend, then that American is going to receive $1,000 a month. And we can build an economy that actually works for workers here in America of different skill sets and different ages and different locations.
And going back to that $1,000 a month, it does sound very attractive to a lot of people. And do you think that's going to solve the problem that AI and technology is creating to the labor force? Or do you think there are other ways that we can evolve with this trend?
Well, we have our work cut out for us. We have a lot of evolving to do relatively quickly. $1,000 a month would do a tremendous amount of good for tens of millions of American families, where you would see just what you saw in other locations where families' relationships would improve, their nutrition would improve, their mental health would improve, graduation rates would go up. So families would be much, much better off with $1,000 a month, but it does not solve the entire problem. When artificial intelligence comes along and starts getting rid of all these back office jobs and legal jobs and accounting jobs and the rest of it, like $1,000 a month isn't a cure-all, but it's the first big step we can take towards an economy that starts valuing us, humans, in a way that we can actually flourish long-term, even with artificial intelligence getting stronger and stronger.
So you're not opposed to artificial intelligence? Because it is, I don't really think it's going away.
Oh, no, of course not.
I think it's going to be more invested into our life.
Yes, very much so. I love new technologies and progress. What I don't love is an economic system that's going to drive more and more Americans to become very angry and sad over the fact that their way of life's been taken away.
And so for AI, we know that we're going to have that $1,000 that's going to make short-term a little easier. So for long-term, do you have any idea of how we are going to evolve with this? Because a lot of people compare this to the Industrial Revolution. I know that you're very frustrated when people kind of compare what we have now to the revolution back then. And why does that annoy you, and what do you think the differences are?
Well, people have started calling this the fourth industrial revolution. And what frustrates me is when people compare it to the Industrial Revolution as a signal that everything's going to be fine because we went through it before. But when you look at American history, the Industrial Revolution caused mass protests and violence that killed dozens of people and caused billions of dollars worth of damage. And America instituted universal high school in 1911, in part because of all of the problems and violence. So even if you were to rely upon the Industrial Revolution, you would think this is going to be very, very difficult. And Bain and McKinsey and others have projected that we're going to get rid of workers at 3 to 4 times the rate of the Industrial Revolution. So this is going to be 3 times faster, and the first time was very, very difficult. So if that's what you project, then we need to be making much, much bigger moves to help Americans adapt and move forward.
And that $1,000 is going to be the first step.
And the $1,000 is the first step, that's right.
And we know that you mentioned earlier that your family, your parents, they were born in Taiwan and they moved to America. So you obviously have some sort of tie with Taiwan, and you have visits to Taiwan growing up. And Taiwan has always been a very sensitive issue between China and US. If you were to become the president, how do you think you're going to tackle that issue?
Well, you know, one thing I found very encouraging is that there's been a lot of supportive information about me in the Chinese media and Chinese social media. And so I think the Chinese people and the Chinese government would actually be very pleased if I were to become president, and I might be in a better position to hopefully help ease the relationship between certainly both US and China, but also where Taiwan is concerned. And that's very much my hope.
And how do you think the relationship between the 3 different administrations is going to evolve over time? Do you think the status quo is what we should be hoping for in the upcoming future? You
know, I tend to focus on the day-to-day lives of people. Like, I think getting too caught up in, you know, abstractions is just, it can be very counterproductive. And so right now I look at it as like, you know, if someone wakes up in Taiwan, someone wakes up in China, or someone wakes up in the United States, like how are their kids doing? Like, are they able to make a good living for themselves? Like, are those to me are the issues that we should focus on. And so if the status quo is serving people well on that side, then to me there'd be no reason to necessarily look to change it.
And one thing that's going to impact everyone's life right now is the trade war that's between China and the US. And with the deadline coming pretty soon, if you were the president, how would you tackle this negotiation with China?
Sure. If I were the president, I never would have declared a trade war because I think changing the pricing on companies that have been making plans for years is deeply wrong, because that company has literally been making massive investments based upon a certain pricing structure. They've hired people, they've built plants, they've written contracts, and then you change the pricing on them and they have to go and tear all that up and fire people and, like, you know, tear down the investment. And that's bad for people on both sides. It's bad for companies on both sides, just bad for business. And then you end up with a retaliation that ends up just sort of reducing the benefits of trade on both sides. So there are legitimate problems in the U.S. trade relationship with China, but starting a trade war to me is not a productive way to go.
How do you predict this trade war is going to go?
Well, I mean, I hope they resolve it relatively soon. It seems like both sides are very interested in doing that. I mean, it's already caused more damage on both sides than you'd like to see.
And you've started campaigning since November 2017. It's been a little over a year now.
Well, yeah, I didn't start until really last year. You just had to file paperwork.
Oh, so we will say about a year, a little less than a year.
Yeah, a little less than a year.
And what kind of response have you been getting, and what kind of feedback have you been getting from the Asian American and also the Chinese immigrant community?
Well, you know, Asian Americans are very excited to have the first Asian American man to run for president in our nation's history. I think for many of them, they want to see if I'm for real. They're just like, you know, that's like, But during this time, I've been to Iowa 7 times and New Hampshire 7 times. And CNN recently included me in their poll of Iowa, and I was tied with Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator from New York. Mm-hmm. So Americans across the country are responding very positively to me in my campaign because I'm talking about the real facts of what's impacted their communities. Where when I go to Iowa, I ask them very simple questions like, have you noticed your stores closing? Mm-hmm. And they say, yes, we have. And then I ask them why that is, and they say Amazon. And that's right. Americans are quite smart. And then I suggest to them, well, that's just going to keep getting worse. So let's try and get some of that value back here to Iowa in the form of this dividend that I would like to pass as president. And they get very, very excited about that. I'm personally giving a family in Iowa and New Hampshire $1,000 a month just to illustrate the fact that $1,000 would really help Americans' day-to-day lives. And so national press, CNBC, and others have covered that dividend for these families. And it's been so inspirational that another set of Americans in Georgia have decided to give a family in South Carolina $1,000 a month just to honor my campaign, because people see that $1,000 a month would improve people's lives.
And some of these people that I've been talking to, like people in Iowa, some of these are very important states that helped Donald Trump get elected. So by putting out this universal basic income platform, do you think you'll be able to take some of those votes back for the Democratic Party? Oh
yeah, I'm already seeing that, where when I'm out in the country, people will come up to me and say, I voted for Donald Trump and I will vote for you. Because you're talking about the same problems that Donald Trump was talking about, but you have real solutions. Because people realize that Donald Trump's solutions don't work. Build a wall, turn back time, bring the jobs back. Everyone knows those things aren't really going to work. I'm saying, look, we have to turn the clock forward. We have to start moving society into the 21st century. And the reason why I'm talking about Iowa and New Hampshire so much is that those are the first 2 states that vote in the Democratic primary, and so they will determine who Americans choose to be the next president. That's just the way the American political system works, that Iowa and New Hampshire vote first.
And how do you think the Chinese community is going to respond to your campaign?
Well, I'm already seeing tremendous excitement from the Chinese American community around the country, where people come up to me and they want to pinch me to see if I'm real.
Right.
And there's a sense, I think, among many Chinese Americans that we are not as American as other Americans, and that we should just accept that and just sort of keep our heads down and be like fortunate, or like be grateful.
Just be doctors and lawyers and make money.
Yeah, just be grateful that you're here and just do your thing. And so I think my campaign is a wake-up call that we are as American as any other American, and that there's nothing stopping Chinese American, Asian American from becoming president of the United States.
There's no bamboo ceiling for ordinary citizens like us.
No, there is not, particularly when it comes to actually trying to improve people's lives, because it's not a zero-sum game. And the fact is, America needs new ideas. It needs new leadership, and it needs this kind of leadership now, like a real problem solver that's going to try and fix things, because right now the American political system is not up to the challenge.
And 2020 is not tomorrow, but it's pretty soon. It's coming. You're expecting to have a lot of really fierce competitions, both within your party and on a national level. So there's only going to be one winner. In case you don't get elected, what's your future plan? Do you plan to stay in the political scene? Are you going to be thinking about something that's more local?
You know, my vision is that there are going to be a group of people that head to Washington, D.C. to try and fix the mess that's been building up over the last number of years. That, again, is why Donald Trump got elected in the first place. And I want to help solve those problems. If it's as president, that would be ideal. If it's as vice president, if it's in some other capacity. But I want to solve these problems for this country, the country that my children and everyone else's children are going to grow up in. Because unfortunately, the problems here in America are just getting worse. And so that's my goal as president or in some other position.
And how can people help and be part of your campaign?
Yeah, so to get me on the national debate stage in June of this year, just go to yang2020.com and just sign up, follow us on social media. And if you contribute anything, $1, $5, $10, that will help get me on the debate stage. But let's show the rest of America what our community can do. Just go to yang2020.com, and hopefully I'll see some of you on the trail. Carol, thank you so much.
Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Hey.